Ambassador Richard Hayes stood at the large window of the Earthship ESS Harmony, watching the alien world of Kethver grow larger as they approached. The planet was beautiful in a strange way, with purple oceans and golden continents that sparkled under the light of twin suns. After 3 months of travel through space, they had finally reached the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. Richard was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had spent most of his life working with different countries on Earth, helping them solve problems without fighting. Now, at age 55, he faced his biggest challenge yet. He was Earth's first ambassador to an alien civilization, and the future of humanity might depend on what happened in the next few days. "Sir, we'll be landing in 1 hour," said Commander Lisa Martinez as she entered the room. She was the head of security for the mission, a strong woman with dark hair who had served in Earth's military for 15 years. She wore her uniform with pride, but Richard could see the worry in her eyes. "Thank you, Lisa," Richard replied, turning away from the window. "Are your people ready?" "As ready as we can be, sir. The Zephyrians promised us safe passage, but we don't know much about their culture or their true intentions." Lisa checked her weapon one more time. "My team will stay close to you at all times," Richard nodded. He understood Lisa's concerns. The Zephyrians had been watching human expansion into space for the past 10 years. At first they seemed friendly, sending messages of greeting when humans built their first colonies on distant worlds. But lately their messages had become colder, more formal. Some people on Earth believed the Zephyrians saw humanity as a threat. Dr. Nathan Burke entered the room, carrying a thick folder of documents. Nathan was Richard's chief aide, a smart man who had studied alien languages and cultures for years. He looked nervous, constantly adjusting his glasses as he read through his notes. "The latest intelligence reports are troubling," Nathan said quietly. "Our spies suggest there are 2 main groups among the Zephyrians. The moderates, led by High Chancellor Vexthal, want to work with us. But there's also a military faction that sees us as dangerous." Richard sat down at the table and gestured for his companions to join him. "Tell me about this military faction." Nathan opened his folder and pulled out several photographs. "They're led by someone called War Prime Culther. He's been giving speeches about how young races like humanity need to be controlled before they become too powerful. He believes that if we're allowed to grow freely, we'll eventually challenge the Zephyrian Empire." "And what about the moderates?" Richard asked. "High Chancellor Vexthal has been in power for 20 years, Nathan explained. He's older and more cautious, but he seems to understand that cooperation is better than conflict. There's also Sub-Commander Thexian, who has been very interested in human technology and culture." Lisa leaned forward. "What's your assessment?" "Nathan, are we walking into a trap?" Nathan thought for a moment before answering, "I don't think so. The Zephyrians invited us here officially. If they wanted to hurt us, there would be easier ways to do it. But we need to be very careful about what we say and do. One mistake could turn the moderates against us." The ship shuddered slightly as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the window, Richard could see the Zephyrian capital city rising up from the golden landscape. The buildings were tall and twisted like metal trees reaching toward the sky. Strange flying vehicles moved between them, and Richard could see crowds of Zephyrians gathered in the streets below. "They're curious about us," Nathan observed, watching the crowds. "This is the first time most of them have seen humans." The S-Harmony landed at a special platform built just for their visit. As the engines powered down, Richard felt his heart beating faster. Everything he had trained for, everything Earth had hoped for, would be decided in the next few days. The airlock opened, and Richard got his first look at the Zephyrians up close. They were taller than humans, with blue-gray skin and large eyes that seemed to glow softly. Their leader, High Chancellor Vexthal, stepped forward with what Richard hoped was a welcoming expression. "Ambassador Hayes," the Chancellor said in carefully practiced English, "welcome to Kethver. We are honored by your presence." Richard bowed slightly as Nathan had taught him. "Thank you, Your Excellency. I bring greetings from Earth and all of humanity. We come in peace, seeking friendship and cooperation." The Chancellor's expression seemed pleased. Come, we have prepared quarters for you and your delegation. Tomorrow we will begin our discussions. As they walked through the alien city, Richard noticed that the Zephyrians had made real efforts to make them comfortable. Human food had been prepared, and the rooms they were given had furniture sized for human bodies. It was a good sign, but Richard remained cautious that evening. As Richard reviewed his notes for the next day's meetings, Lisa came to his room with a concerned expression. "Sir, my sensors are picking up unusual activity around the city. There are more military vehicles than usual, and some of my contacts report seeing War Prime Coulthar S forces moving into position." Richard looked up from his papers. "Do you think we're in danger?" "I'm not sure," Lisa admitted. "It could be normal security for an important diplomatic event, but I want to be ready for anything." The next morning, Richard entered the great hall where the negotiations would take place. The room was massive, with curved walls that seemed to reach up forever. Dozens of Zephyrian officials sat at a curved table, with High Chancellor Vexthal at the center. Richard took his place at the smaller human table, with Nathan on his right and Lisa standing nearby. He opened his folder and began to present Earth's proposal. "Your Excellency, members of the Zephyrian Council," he began, "humanity comes before you today with an offer of partnership. We propose sharing our technology and knowledge in exchange for peaceful coexistence and mutual trade." The Chancellor listened carefully, occasionally asking questions through his translator. Richard could see that some of the Zephyrians seemed interested, leaning forward to hear better, but others looked suspicious, whispering among themselves. "Tell us, Ambassador Hayes," said a stern-looking Zephyrian with military markings. "Why should we trust a species that has expanded so rapidly through space? In just 50 years you have built colonies on dozens of worlds." Richard had expected this question. "Honored Counselor, humanity expands because we are curious and because we need resources for our growing population. But we have no desire to threaten or conquer other species. We believe the galaxy is large enough for all of us." The military official didn't look convinced, but High Chancellor Vexthal raised his hand for silence. "We will consider your proposal carefully, Ambassador. Perhaps you could tell us more about your defensive capabilities? We have heard that humans are quite resourceful in protecting themselves." Richard felt a chill at the question. It seemed innocent enough, but he sensed there was more behind it. "We defend ourselves when necessary, Your Excellency, but we prefer to solve problems through talking and cooperation." Sub-Commander Thexian, a younger Zephyrian with curious eyes, leaned forward. "We have studied your history, Ambassador. Your species has survived ice ages, plagues, and wars. You have shown remarkable ability to adapt and overcome challenges. This is ... impressive." "Thank you," Richard replied. Though he wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment or a warning, the discussions continued for hours, with both sides carefully exploring the possibilities for cooperation. Richard began to feel hopeful as the Chancellor and his moderate supporters seemed genuinely interested in working with humanity. But as the day ended and Richard returned to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Through his window, he could see military vehicles patrolling the streets, and the crowds that had seemed so curious the day before now looked tense and worried. Nathan knocked on his door as Richard was preparing for bed. "Sir, I've been monitoring Zephyrian communications. There's something you need to know." Richard opened the door and Nathan entered quickly, looking around nervously. "What is it?" "There are reports of military movements throughout Zephyrian space. War Prime Coulthar has been meeting with his commanders, and there are rumors of a planned action against human colonies." Richard felt his stomach drop. "Are you sure?" "I'm not certain," Nathan admitted, "but I think we need to be very careful. Tomorrow's final session could determine whether we have peace or war." As Richard lay in bed that night, he thought about his wife and children back on Earth. He had come here hoping to build a bridge between two civilizations, but now he wondered if he had walked into something much more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The morning of the final negotiation session began with hope. Ambassador Richard Hayes woke early and reviewed his notes one last time. After 3 days of careful talks, it seemed like the Zephyrians were ready to agree to a peace treaty. Hi. Chancellor Vexthal had smiled often during yesterday's meetings, and even some of the military officials seemed less hostile. Richard put on his best diplomatic suit and checked his appearance in the mirror. Today, he would either return to Earth as the man who brought peace between humans and aliens, or he would have to tell his people that diplomacy had failed. He hoped for the first option. Commander Lisa Martinez knocked on his door at exactly 8 o'clock. She was dressed in her formal uniform, but Richard could see the tension in her shoulders. Lisa had been worried all night about the increased military presence around the city. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly. "Are you ready for today's session?" "As ready as I can be," Richard replied, picking up his folder of documents. "Any new developments overnight?" Lisa hesitated before answering. "My team detected more military vehicles moving through the city. Sergeant Jake Coleman thinks they're positioning themselves around the diplomatic compound. It could be normal security, but something feels wrong." Dr. Nathan Burke joined them in the hallway, looking pale and nervous. He had been up most of the night trying to decode intercepted Zephyrian communications, but the messages were too heavily encrypted for his equipment. "I wish we had more information," Nathan said as they walked toward the Great Hall. "The Zephyrians have been very careful about what they say around us." The three humans entered the massive negotiation room, where dozens of Zephyrian officials were already seated. High Chancellor Vexthal sat at the center of the curved table, flanked by his advisors. But Richard noticed that War Prime Coulthar was also present today, along with several other military commanders who hadn't attended previous sessions. "Ambassador Hayes," the Chancellor said with what seemed like genuine warmth, "we are ready to conclude our discussions. I believe we have found a path forward that will benefit both our peoples." Richard felt a surge of relief as he took his seat. Maybe Lisa's worries had been unnecessary. Maybe they really were about to make history. "Your Excellency," Richard began, "I'm pleased to hear that Earth is eager to begin this new chapter in human-Zephyrian relations." But as Richard opened his folder to present the final treaty terms, War Prime Coulthar suddenly stood up. The alien military leader was tall and imposing, with scars across his blue-gray face that spoke of many battles. His large eyes seemed to glow with anger. "High Chancellor," Coulthar said in a voice that echoed through the great hall, "I cannot allow this charade to continue." The room fell silent. Richard felt his heart begin to race as he saw the Chancellor's expression change from confusion to alarm. "War Prime, what is the meaning of this?" Vexthal demanded. Coulthar pointed directly at Richard. "This human is not a diplomat. He is a spy sent to gather intelligence about our defenses while pretending to seek peace. We have discovered evidence that his people are planning to invade our territory." "That's not true." Richard stood up quickly, his hands raised peacefully. "I came here only to build friendship between our peoples. Humanity has no intention of attacking anyone." But Coulthar wasn't listening. He gestured to his soldiers, who had been hidden around the room. Suddenly, dozens of armed Zephyrians emerged from alcoves and doorways. Surrounding the small human delegation, Lisa immediately reached for her weapon, but she was outnumbered 50-1. "Sir, get behind me," she ordered Richard, even as she raised her hands to show she wasn't a threat. "There will be no more lives," Coulthar announced. "The human expansion ends today. Let this be a message to all species who think they can threaten the Zephyrian Empire." High Chancellor Vexthal stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "War Prime, you overstep your authority. These humans are guests under my protection. I will not allow harm to come to them." Coulthar turned to face the Chancellor, his expression cold. "Your protection ends now, old one. The Military Council has voted. We will deal with the human threat our own way." Richard watched in horror as more soldiers entered the room. Some of them were setting up strange devices that looked like cameras. Others were forcing the moderate Zephyrian officials to move away from the table. "You're making a terrible mistake," Richard said, trying to keep his voice calm. "If you harm us, it will only prove to my people that humans and Zephyrians cannot live in peace. Is that what you want?" What I want, Coulter replied, is for other species to understand what happens when they challenge us. Your death will be broadcast across the galaxy as a warning. Nathan stepped forward, his voice shaking but determined. Please, listen to. Reason, Ambassador Hayes is telling the truth. We came here only to talk, to find a way for our peoples to coexist. One of Coulter's soldiers struck Nathan with the butt of his weapon, sending the young diplomat to the floor. Lisa started to move toward him, but stopped when a dozen weapons were pointed at her. The time for talk is over, Coulter said. The camera devices were now active, red lights blinking as they recorded everything. Let the galaxy witness what happens to those who threaten the Zephyrian Empire. Richard felt strangely calm as he faced his death. He thought of his wife Sarah and his 2 children back on Earth. He thought of all the people who had believed in this mission, who had hoped for peace between the stars. If you kill me, Richard said quietly, you will not stop humanity. You will only make them angry. And you don't want to see what humans do when they're angry. Coulter laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the hall. We are not afraid of your primitive species. After we destroy you, we will move against your colonies. Humanity will learn its place in the galaxy. The War Prime drew his weapon, a sleek device that hummed with energy. Richard closed his eyes and thought of home. The execution was swift and brutal. Coulter wanted to send a message, and he made sure the cameras captured every moment. Richard Hayes, Earth's first ambassador to an alien civilization, died trying to protect his people. And his dreams of peace, but even as Richard fell, Lisa was already moving. She had noticed something that Coulter's soldiers had missed. During the chaos, Lieutenant Amy Foster and Sergeant Jake Coleman had positioned themselves near a side exit. When the execution began, they created a distraction by throwing smoke. Grenades they had hidden in their equipment. Nathan, this way! Lisa shouted, grabbing the injured diplomat and pulling him toward the exit. Amy and Jake provided covering fire, their human weapons proving surprisingly effective against Zephyrian armor. The small group of survivors fought their way through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. Lisa had memorized the layout of the compound during their first day, and she led them toward the landing platform where Zephyrian transport ships were kept. The ambassador, Nathan gasped as they ran. We can't leave him. He's gone, Lisa said, grimly, but we can make sure his death means something. We have to get back to Earth and tell them what really happened here. They reached the landing platform just as alarms began blaring throughout the city. Jake used his technical skills to break into a small Zephyrian scout ship, while Amy and Lisa held off pursuing soldiers. Got it, Jake shouted as the ship's engines came to life. Everyone aboard. The stolen ship lifted off just as War Prime. Coulter's forces surrounded the platform. Lisa piloted the craft through the city's defenses, using her military training to avoid the weapons fire that erupted from the ground as they escaped into space. Nathan activated the ship's communication system. He had managed to record parts of the execution on a hidden device, and now he began transmitting the footage back toward human space. This is Dr. Nathan Burke of the Earth Diplomatic Mission, he said into the recorder. Ambassador Richard Hayes has been murdered by Zephyrian extremists. This was not an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a planned execution designed to intimidate humanity and other species. The small ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, beginning the long journey home. Behind them, War Prime Coulter was already spinning his story, claiming that the humans had been spies and that their deaths were justified, but High Chancellor Vexthal knew the truth. In his private chambers, the old leader sat in silence, knowing that his moderate government had just lost control. The military extremists had taken over, and they had just declared war on a species they knew nothing about. Sub-Commander Vexion found the Chancellor hours later, still sitting in the dark. Sir, the younger Zephyrian said carefully. What are your orders? Vexthal looked up with tired eyes. Signal the fleet commanders. Tell them to prepare for war. I fear we have just made the greatest mistake in Zephyrian history. Sir, surely the humans will see reason. They're a young species, still learning about galactic politics. The Chancellor shook his head slowly. You don't understand, Xien? I've studied their history. Humans don't forget when someone kills their people, and they don't forgive. Meanwhile, the footage of Richard Hayes's execution was already spreading through human space. On Earth, President Karen Williams was awakened in the middle of the night by her security chief. The images were horrifying, but the message was clear: humanity's first diplomat was dead, murdered while trying to make peace. The news of Ambassador Richard Hayes's murder reached Earth exactly 18 hours after the execution. President Karen Williams was in the middle of a budget meeting when her security chief burst into the room with the emergency report. The footage that Dr. Nathan Burke had transmitted was clear and horrifying. The galaxy's first human diplomat had been killed in cold blood. His death broadcast as a warning to other species. President Williams watched the recording 3 times before she could speak. The images of Richard being executed while trying to make peace burned into her mind. She had known Richard personally for over 10 years. He was a good man who believed in solving problems through talking rather than fighting. Now he was dead, and the Zephyrians were claiming he had been a spy. "Get me Admiral Clark," she ordered her aide, "and call an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly. Every representative needs to see this." Within hours, the footage was playing on screens across human space. On the colony worlds, in the space stations, in the cities of Earth itself, people watched in stunned silence as their ambassador was murdered. The reaction was swift and angry. Protests erupted in major cities. Colonial governors demanded immediate military action. The peaceful expansion of humanity into space had been met with violence, and people wanted justice. Admiral Ryan Clark arrived at the presidential building still wearing his uniform from the morning's fleet exercises. He was a stern man with gray hair and cold blue eyes, someone who had spent his entire career preparing for the day when humanity would have to defend itself against alien threats. That day had finally come. "Admiral," President Williams said, as he entered her office, "how quickly can we mobilize the Colonial Defense Fleet?" "Give me 3 weeks, Madam President," Clark replied without hesitation. "The Zephyrians think they can murder our people and face no consequences." "They're about to learn how wrong they are," the President nodded grimly. "What do you need?" "Full authorization to recall all ships from patrol duties. I want every captain, every crew member, every piece of military equipment ready for combat. And I need the civilian shipyards to start producing warships around the clock." While the politicians debated and the military prepared, the surviving members of the diplomatic mission were still making their way back to human space. Commander Lisa Martinez had pushed the stolen Zephyrian ship to its limits, but it would still take them 2 weeks to reach the nearest human colony. Dr. Nathan Burke spent most of the journey working on intelligence reports. Despite his injuries from the Zephyrian soldiers' attack, he forced himself to document everything he had learned about their technology, their military structure, and their weaknesses. The information might save human lives in the coming war. "Lisa," Nathan said one evening as they sat in the ship's small cabin, "do you think we could have prevented this somehow?" Lisa looked up from the weapon she was cleaning. "No, Nathan. War Prime Coulter planned this from the beginning. He wanted to kill Richard and use it as an excuse to attack our colonies. We were just unlucky enough to be there when he made his move." Lieutenant Amy Foster was monitoring Zephyrian communications from the ship's scanner station. "I'm picking up increased military chatter," she reported. "It sounds like they're mobilizing their fleet." Sergeant Jake Coleman, who had been studying the ship's technical systems, looked up with concern. "How long do you think we have before they attack our colonies?" "Not long," Lisa replied. "But Admiral Clark knows how to fight, and humans are very good at adapting to new situations." Back on Earth, the military mobilization was happening faster than anyone had expected. General Patricia Stone, the head of ground forces, was coordinating with Admiral Clark to prepare for multiple types of warfare. They didn't know if the Zephyrians would attack colonies, space stations, or Earth itself, so they had to be ready for everything. Captain Danny Rodriguez received his orders while his ship, the ESS Retribution, was docked at the Mars Naval base. He was a young officer with a reputation for creative tactics and an ability to inspire his crew. His ship was one of the newest in the fleet, equipped with advanced weapons and shields that had never been tested in real combat. "Captain," his communications officer said as he reviewed the battle plans, "we're getting reports from the outer colonies. Several ships have detected Zephyrian scouts near the border systems." Danny studied the star charts on his command screen. "They're testing our defenses, trying to find weak points. Signal the fleet. We move out in 6 hours." Dr. Helen Carter was working in her laboratory when the call came. She was Earth's leading expert on alien biology and technology, and now the military needed her expertise to find ways to defeat the Zephyrians. She had been studying the captured samples from Richard's original mission, looking for anything that might give humanity an advantage. "The Zephyrians are physically stronger than humans," she explained to a room full of military officers, "but they're also more rigid in their thinking. They follow established patterns and don't adapt quickly to new situations. That's something we can use against them." General Stone leaned forward. "What about their technology?" "It's more advanced than ours in some ways," Dr. Carter admitted, "but it's also more complex. Their weapons and shields require specific energy frequencies to operate. If we can disrupt those frequencies, we might be able to neutralize their advantages." While the scientists worked on weapons, the military focused on strategy. Admiral Clark had studied every piece of information about Zephyrian tactics and capabilities. He knew that humanity's best chance was to strike first and strike hard, before the aliens could organize their full military might. The first battle of the war came sooner than expected. The Zephyrians launched a surprise attack on the human colony of New Geneva, a mining world near the border between human and Zephyrian space. The colonists had only a few hours warning before enemy ships appeared in their system. Mayor Pete Jackson was a former military officer who had retired to civilian life after losing his arm in a training accident. When the attack began, he quickly organized the colony's defenses. New Geneva wasn't a military world, but it had mining equipment that could be turned into weapons and enough determined people to use them. "Every able-bodied person gets a weapon," Jackson announced over the colonies. Communication system. "We're not soldiers, but we're not going to let these aliens destroy our home without a fight." The battle for New Geneva lasted 8 hours. The Zephyrian fleet was larger and better equipped, but the colonists fought with a desperation that surprised their attackers. Mining lasers were used to damage enemy ships. Construction robots were reprogrammed to carry explosives. Even children helped by running messages between defensive positions. Captain Rodriguez and the ESS Retribution arrived just as the colony's defenses were about to fail. His ship was outnumbered 3-1, but he used tactics that the Zephyrians had never seen before. Instead of engaging in direct combat, he used the asteroid field around New Geneva to hide his ship, striking at the enemy from unexpected angles. "Target their command ship," Rodriguez ordered his weapons officer. "If we can disrupt their coordination, the rest of their fleet will be confused." The attack worked perfectly. The Zephyrian commander, used to traditional space battles, couldn't adapt to Rodriguez's unconventional approach. Within an hour, the alien fleet was retreating, leaving behind several damaged ships and a very angry war prime Coulthar. News of the victory at New Geneva spread quickly through human space. People who had been afraid suddenly felt hope. The Zephyrians could be beaten. Humanity could defend itself, but the war was far from over. Intelligence reports showed that the Zephyrians were calling for help from their allied species, the Vrex. Dominion and the Stellar Collective were considering joining the fight against humanity. What had started as a conflict between two species might soon become a galactic war. Commander Lisa Martinez and her team finally reached human space 2 days after the battle at New Geneva. They were debriefed by intelligence officers who wanted to know everything about Zephyrian capabilities and weaknesses. Nathan's reports were immediately sent to military commanders throughout human space. "They underestimated us," Lisa told Admiral Clark during their meeting. War Prime Coulter thinks humans are weak because we're young and because we prefer diplomacy to fighting. He's about to learn that we're much more dangerous than he imagined. Admiral Clark nodded grimly. The Zephyrians wanted to send a message. By killing Ambassador Hayes, now we're going to send them a message of our own. The Colonial Defense Fleet was now fully mobilized, with over 200 ships ready for combat. New weapons based on Dr. Carter's research were being installed on every vessel. Ground forces were preparing to defend human colonies and potentially attack. Zephyrian worlds, President Williams addressed the nation one final time before the major offensive began. Richard Hayes died trying to bring peace to the galaxy, she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. His death will not be forgotten, and it will not go unanswered. The Zephyrians believe they can intimidate humanity through violence. They're about to discover that they have made the greatest mistake in their civilization's history. The speech was broadcast not just to human space, but to every species in the galaxy. The war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire had been raging for 2 months when the first allied alien ships appeared in Zephyrian space. The Vrex Dominion, a military alliance of 4 different species, had decided to support the Zephyrians against what they called the human threat. The Stellar Collective, a group of trading worlds, also sent ships to help defend Zephyrian territory. Admiral Ryan Clark watched the intelligence reports with growing concern. What had started as a war between 2 species was becoming something much larger. The galaxy's older civilizations were uniting against humanity, seeing Earth's rapid expansion and military success as dangerous. "They're afraid of us," Clark told his staff during a strategy meeting aboard his flagship, the ESS Defiance. "Every victory we win makes them more worried about what humans might do next." Captain Danny Rodriguez had become something of a legend among human forces. His unconventional tactics at New Geneva had been studied and copied by other commanders. Now he was leading a small fleet toward the Kepler Junction, a strategic crossroads that connected human space to 3 different alien territories. "If we can control the junction," Rodriguez explained to his officers, "we can stop enemy reinforcements from reaching the main battle zones. But intelligence says the Zephyrians are sending their largest fleet to stop us. The battle at Kepler Junction would be the biggest space fight in human history." Rodriguez had 12 ships under his command, facing a combined alien fleet of over 40 vessels. The odds were terrible, but he had learned something important about fighting aliens. They expected humans to follow the same battle tactics that other species used. Engineer Chief Bobby Thompson was working around the clock to modify the fleet's weapons systems. He was a short man with grease-stained coveralls and an incredible ability to make machines work better than their designers had intended. His latest invention was a way to overload the ship's main guns, making them much more powerful but also much more dangerous to use. "Captain," Thompson reported as they approached the junction, "the weapon modifications are ready. But I have to warn you, if we push the guns too hard, they might explode and take half the ship with them." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Understood, Chief. We'll use them only when we have to." The alien fleet was waiting for them at the junction, arranged in the traditional formation that had been used in space battles for centuries. The Zephyrian commander, Fleet Admiral Rextion, was confident that superior numbers and firepower would easily defeat the small human force. "Begin the attack," Rextion ordered. "Show these humans what happens when they challenge their betters." But Rodriguez had no intention of fighting a traditional battle. As the alien fleet moved forward in their neat formation, the human ships scattered in all directions, using the asteroid field around the junction to hide their movements. "They're running away," one of the Vrex commanders reported to Rexgen. "Should we pursue?" "No," the Zephyrian admiral replied. "They're trying to lead us into a trap. Maintain formation and wait for them to come to us." But the humans weren't running. They were positioning themselves for a series of coordinated strikes that would hit the alien fleet from multiple directions at once. Rodriguez had studied the battle records from New Geneva and other human victories, learning that aliens had trouble adapting to rapid changes in tactics. "All ships, execute pattern Delta," Rodriguez ordered over the communication system. Remember, we only get one chance at this. The human ships emerged from the asteroid field simultaneously, their modified weapons firing with incredible intensity. The aliens' neat formation, which had been their strength, now became their weakness as multiple ships were caught in the crossfire. Engineer Chief Thompson's modifications worked perfectly. The overloaded weapons punched through alien shields that should have been impenetrable. 3 enemy ships were destroyed in the first minute of combat, and several others were badly damaged. Impossible, Rekshin muttered as he watched his fleet, being torn apart by forces that should have been no match for them. How are they doing this? The answer was simple. Humans were willing to take risks that other species wouldn't consider. While the aliens worried about losing ships and crew members, the humans were focused only on winning. They used their damaged vessels as weapons, ramming them into enemy ships when their guns failed. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the alien fleet had been completely destroyed, and the humans controlled the Kepler Junction. Rodriguez had lost 4 of his 12 ships, but he had proven that humanity could defeat any enemy. If they were willing to fight smart and fight hard, news of the victory spread quickly through both human and alien space. For humans, it was proof that they could win the war. For the aliens, it was a terrifying demonstration of human military capability. Meanwhile, on the colony world of New Haven, the war was taking a much darker turn. The Zephyrians had decided that if they couldn't defeat human military forces, they would attack civilian targets instead. Governor Julie Parker received the warning with only 3 hours before the attack began. All civilians to the emergency shelters, she ordered over the colony's communication system. This is not a drill. Enemy forces are approaching. New Haven was a farming world with almost no military defenses. The colonists were families who had come to space looking for a new life, not soldiers prepared to fight a war. But they were still humans, and humans had a long history of fighting for their homes. Steve Kelly was a former construction worker who had become the head of the colony's volunteer militia. He had 23 people under his command, armed with hunting rifles and mining equipment. Against a Zephyrian battle fleet, they stood no chance in a direct fight. "We can't stop them," Kelly told his militia as they watched the enemy ships approach. "But we can make them pay for every inch of ground they take. And we can buy time for the civilians to escape." The attack on New Haven was brutal. The Zephyrians landed ground forces that swept through the colony, destroying buildings and killing anyone who resisted. Governor Parker coordinated the evacuation from her command center, even as enemy soldiers fought their way through the streets outside. "Transport ship Alpha 7, you're cleared for departure," she radioed to one of the evacuation vessels. "Take the children to the safety zone and don't look back." But not everyone could escape. Kelly's militia fought a running battle through the colony, using their knowledge of the terrain to slow down the alien advance. They couldn't win, but they could make the Zephyrians work for their victory. The massacre at New Haven lasted 2 days. When it was over, nearly 3,000 civilians were dead, and the colony was in ruins. The Zephyrians broadcast images of the destruction throughout the galaxy, claiming it was punishment for human aggression. But the attack on New Haven had an effect that War Prime Culthor hadn't expected. Instead of terrifying other human colonies into surrender, it made them angry. Very angry. Dr. Nathan Burke, now working as a military intelligence officer, was analyzing the aftermath of the attack when he made a horrifying discovery. In the ruins of New Haven, human investigators had found mass graves containing the remains of previous diplomatic missions from other species. "They've been doing this for years," Burke told Admiral Clark during their emergency meeting. "The Zephyrians have been murdering diplomats from dozens of different species and then covering it up. Ambassador Hayes wasn't their first victim. The evidence was overwhelming. The Zephyrians had killed diplomatic missions from the Altair Federation, the Vega Republic, and at least 6 other civilizations. Each time they had claimed the diplomats were spies or threats to galactic security. "Release this information to every government in the galaxy," Admiral Clark ordered. "Let them see what the Zephyrians really are." The revelation changed everything. Species that had been supporting the Zephyrians suddenly found themselves questioning their alliance. The Altair Federation immediately withdrew their ships from Zephyrian space. The Vega Republic demanded an explanation for the murder of their diplomats 20 years earlier, but some allies remained loyal to the Zephyrians. The Vrex Dominion claimed the evidence was fake, created by humans to justify their aggression. The Stellar Collective continued to provide supplies and weapons to Zephyrian forces. Dr. Helen Carter was working on humanity's response to the escalating war. Her research team had been studying captured Zephyrian technology and biology, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. Their latest discovery was revolutionary. "We found a way to disrupt their neural networks," she explained to the assembled military commanders. "Zephyrian brains operate on specific electrical frequencies. If we can generate the right kind of interference, we can confuse them or even knock them unconscious." The weapon was still experimental, but early tests showed incredible promise. A small device could disable an entire Zephyrian ship's crew without causing permanent damage. It would give humanity a way to capture enemy vessels and potentially turn the tide of the war. Meanwhile, Major Lisa Martinez was leading special operations teams behind enemy lines. She had been promoted after her escape from the diplomatic compound, and now she was using her knowledge of Zephyrian tactics to strike at their supply lines. "Intelligence says there's a major fuel depot on Zarian Prime." The alarm bells rang throughout Earth's solar system at exactly 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning. The Zephyrian Grand Fleet had been detected at the edge of the system, moving toward humanity's homeworld with the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. War Prime Coulthar had brought over 300 ships, including vessels from the Vrex Dominion and the Stellar Collective, for what he planned to be the final battle of the war. Admiral Ryan Clark stood on the bridge of his flagship, the ESS Defiance, watching the enemy fleet approach on his tactical display. He had been preparing for this moment since the war began, knowing that the Zephyrians would eventually try to strike at Earth itself. The human defense fleet was smaller, with only 150 ships, but every vessel had been modified with the latest weapons and technology. "All ships, this is Admiral Clark," he announced over the fleet communication system. "The enemy thinks they can destroy our homeworld and break our spirit. They're about to learn that attacking Earth is the worst mistake they could possibly make." Captain Danny Rodriguez commanded a squadron of fast attack ships positioned near Jupiter. His job was to harass the enemy fleet and disrupt their formation before they could reach Earth's inner defenses. The young captain had become famous throughout human space for his victories at New Geneva and Kepler Junction, but this battle would be his greatest challenge yet. "Lieutenant Tony Rivera, take your fighters and hit their lead ships," Rodriguez ordered. "Make them think we're trying a direct assault, then pull back and let them chase you into the asteroid belt." Tony Rivera was the best fighter pilot in the human fleet, with an incredible ability to maneuver his small ship through the most dangerous situations. He had shot down 27 enemy fighters in previous battles, but he had never faced odds like this before. "Copy that, Captain," Tony replied as he led his squadron toward the massive alien fleet. "Let's show these aliens what human pilots can do." The battle began with a series of lightning strikes by human fighters against the outer edge of the Zephyrian formation. Tony's pilots used hit-and-run tactics, striking quickly and then disappearing into the asteroid field before the enemy could respond. The attacks didn't do much damage, but they forced the aliens to spread out their formation, making them more vulnerable to the main human fleet. War Prime Coulthar watched the human attacks from his flagship, the massive dreadnought Vengeance of Kethver. He was confident that his superior numbers would eventually overwhelm the human defenses, but he was annoyed by their refusal to fight a proper battle. "Why do they keep running away?" he asked his tactical officer. "Don't they understand that we have them outnumbered 2-1? The humans fight differently than other species," the officer replied nervously. "They don't seem to care about military tradition or proper battle formations," Coulthar growled in frustration. "Then we'll force them to fight properly. Signal the fleet to advance at maximum speed toward Earth. Let's see how brave they are." when their homeworld is under direct attack. But Admiral Clark had anticipated this move. As the Zephyrian fleet accelerated toward Earth, they ran directly into the second phase of the Human Defense Plan. Commander Beth Harris, who was coordinating the inter-system defenses, activated a network of hidden weapon platforms that had been disguised as space debris. All platforms, fire at will, Harris ordered. Target their capital ships first. The hidden weapons caught the aliens completely by surprise. Massive energy beams erupted from what the Zephyrians had thought was harmless space junk, striking their largest ships with devastating effect. 3 alien cruisers were destroyed in the first volley, and several others were badly damaged, but the Zephyrian fleet was too large to be stopped by hidden weapons alone. They pushed through the defensive network, accepting heavy losses in order to reach Earth's immediate vicinity. The final battle would be fought in the space around humanity's homeworld. Dr. Helen Carter was in her laboratory beneath the surface of Earth, making final adjustments to her most important invention. The neural disruption weapon had been tested on captured Zephyrian soldiers, and it worked perfectly. Now she was preparing a much larger version that could affect an entire enemy fleet. "The device is ready," she reported to Admiral Clark over the communication system. "But I need to get it close to the enemy flagship to be effective. The disruption field has a limited range." "Understood, Doctor," Clark replied. "We'll get you the opportunity you need." Major Lisa Martinez was leading a team of Special Forces soldiers in the most dangerous mission of the war. They had to infiltrate the Zephyrian flagship and plant Dr. Carter's device in the ship's main computer core. It was essentially a suicide mission, but Lisa had volunteered anyway. "Remember," she told her team as they prepared to board a captured Zephyrian transport ship, "we're not just fighting for Earth, we're fighting for every human who will ever live and every alien species that wants to be free from Zephyrian oppression." Her team included Sergeant Monica Bell, the explosives expert who had survived the mission to Zarian Prime, and several other volunteers who knew they probably wouldn't survive the mission, but they were willing to die if it meant stopping the Zephyrians from destroying Earth. The space battle around Earth was the most intense fighting in human history. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light as weapons that could destroy entire cities were fired at point-blank range. Captain Rodriguez led his squadron in a desperate attack against the enemy flagship, trying to create a distraction while Lisa's team infiltrated the ship. "All fighters concentrate fire on the flagship's weapon systems," Rodriguez ordered. "Don't let them get a clear shot at Earth." Lieutenant Tony Rivera's fighter was hit by alien fire, but he managed to keep flying long enough to crash his damaged ship into a Zephyrian cruiser. The explosion took out both vessels, but it also opened a gap in the enemy formation that other human ships could exploit. The battle was going badly for the humans. Despite their courage and innovative tactics, they were simply outnumbered by too many enemy ships. Admiral Clark watched his fleet being slowly destroyed. Knowing that Earth's fate hung in the balance, then Major Martinez's team reached the enemy flagship. They fought their way through corridors filled with Zephyrian soldiers, using their knowledge of alien technology to bypass security systems and reach the ship's central computer core. "The device is in place," Lisa reported as she and Sergeant Bell defended the computer room against waves of enemy soldiers. "Tell Dr. Carter to activate it now." Dr. Carter pressed the activation switch from her laboratory on Earth. The neural disruption field spread through the Zephyrian flagship like an invisible wave, affecting every alien brain within range. War Prime Coulthar and his crew collapsed at their stations, their nervous systems overloaded by the disruption signal, but the device had a much greater effect than anyone had expected. The disruption field somehow resonated through the flagship's communication system, spreading to other ships in the fleet. Within minutes, hundreds of Zephyrian vessels were drifting helplessly in space, their crews unconscious or disoriented. "Oh, human ships, this is Admiral Clark," the Admiral announced. "The enemy fleet is disabled. Begin capture operations immediately." The battle for Earth was over. The Zephyrian Grand Fleet, which had been assembled to destroy humanity's homeworld, was now floating helplessly in space. War Prime Coulthar was unconscious on the bridge of his flagship. His dreams of galactic conquest ended by human ingenuity and determination. News of the victory spread throughout human space within hours. On every colony world, in every space station, people celebrated the end of the war. The Zephyrians had been defeated and Earth was safe, but the war's end brought new challenges. President Karen Williams now had to deal with hundreds of captured alien ships and thousands of prisoners. More importantly, she had to figure out how to establish a lasting peace with the Zephyrian Empire and its allies. High Chancellor Vexthal, who had been quietly opposing War Prime Coulthar's extremist policies, took control of the Zephyrian government after Coulthar's capture. He immediately contacted Earth, requesting peace negotiations. "We have made terrible mistakes," Vexthal admitted during his first communication with President Williams. "War Prime Coulthar led us down a path of violence and hatred that nearly destroyed both our civilizations. We want to make amends." The peace negotiations were held on the neutral world of Centauri Prime, with representatives from dozens of different species observing the proceedings. Dr. Nathan Burke, who had survived the original diplomatic mission and witnessed Ambassador Hayes's murder, was chosen to lead the human delegation. "We want peace," Burke told the assembled diplomats, "but we also want justice. The Zephyrians must answer for their crimes, including the murder of diplomats from many different species." The negotiations lasted for 3 weeks. In the end, the Terran Accords were signed by representatives of humanity, the Zephyrian Empire, and most of the major powers in the galaxy. The agreement established new rules for diplomatic relations and created a galactic court to prosecute war criminals. War Prime Coulthar was tried and convicted of crimes against multiple species. His extremist followers were removed from power, and moderate leaders like Subcommander Thexian